Elliot Cross was not a man prone to mystical inclinations. A journalist by trade, he had spent his career unraveling conspiracy theories and separating fact from fiction. But when the dreams began, his methodical mind wrestled with the unshakable feeling that they weren't just dreams, they were messages. Every night for 7 nights, Elliot saw the same vision, a robed figure standing in a vast, featureless void, holding a scroll sealed with 7 marks. The seals pulsed with a strange, golden light, as if alive. The figure never spoke, but Elliot could feel its presence, a silent yet urgent plea emanating from it. When he reached out to touch the scroll, he would wake up, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. At first, he dismissed the dreams as residual stress from his last investigative piece. But when the visions persisted, he began to question their origin. It wasn't until the 7th night that something changed. Instead of waking up, Elliot found himself still dreaming, or at least that's what he thought. The void around him rippled as the robed figure spoke for the first time. "You seek the truth," it said, its voice like a chorus of whispers. "But to uncover it, you must walk the path of the unseen." Before Elliot could respond, the seals on the scroll began to glow, each radiating a distinct energy that made his entire body hum. He awoke abruptly, but this time, the sensation lingered, along with a faint golden imprint of the scroll burned into his memory. Elliot's curiosity had always been his driving force, but now it was his burden. He scoured his modest apartment, searching for anything that could explain what he had experienced. His bookshelf, crammed with titles on history, philosophy, and theology, seemed inadequate. None of them held the answers he sought. It wasn't until he visited the antique bookstore on a forgotten corner of the city that his journey truly began. The shop was dimly lit and smelled of aged paper and incense. A peculiar sense of déjà vu washed over him as the elderly shopkeeper greeted him. "Looking for something, aren't you?" the man said, his eyes twinkling with an almost supernatural awareness. Elliot hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe." Without another word, the shopkeeper reached beneath the counter and retrieved a dusty tome bound in cracked leather. Its title, "The Mysteries of the Sealed Scroll," shimmered faintly in the dim light. "This is not for the faint-hearted," the shopkeeper warned. "But if you're ready, it will open doors you never imagined." Elliot purchased the book, his hands trembling as he placed it into his bag. That night, he opened the tome, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and narratives that seemed both ancient and disturbingly relevant. One passage caught his attention. The seals are not mere symbols of destruction, but keys to the inner chambers of the soul. To open them is to confront the illusions of the self, and only the brave or the desperate succeed. The words resonated with a part of Elliot he didn't yet understand. As he read deeper, the descriptions of the seals mirrored his dreams. The glowing marks, the pulsing energy, the overwhelming sense of purpose. He wasn't imagining things. The seals were real, and they demanded his attention. The following night, Elliot dreamed again, but this time it wasn't the scroll or the robed figure that greeted him. Instead, he stood on the threshold of a massive, ancient door. It was adorned with intricate carvings, images of riders on horses, stars falling from the sky, and a sea of faces twisted in anguish. He didn't need to be told. This was the gateway to the seals. The figure appeared beside him, more distinct now, its face still obscured by a hood. "Each seal holds a truth," it said, "but truth comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Elliot nodded, though his voice failed him. The door began to creak open, its hinges groaning with the weight of untold centuries. A blinding light engulfed him as he stepped forward, the first seal beckoning him into its depths. The light faded, and Elliot found himself standing on a barren plain that stretched endlessly in all directions. The air was thick with tension, a silence so profound it seemed to hum in his ears. In the distance, a figure emerged, mounted on a pristine white horse. Draped in flowing robes, the rider carried a bow and wore a crown that shimmered unnaturally, as if it were alive. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. He instinctively understood that this was the first seal. The rider's appearance radiated a charisma so potent that it pulled at something deep within him, a yearning to trust, to believe, to follow. "Who are you?" Elliot managed to ask, though his voice trembled. "I am the promise of victory," the rider declared, his voice smooth and commanding. "I bring order to chaos, purpose to aimless souls. Follow me, and I will give you everything you desire." Elliot felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, a seductive pull that made him want to kneel. But then, a subtle shadow flickered across the rider's face, and Elliot caught a glimpse of something hollow beneath the facade, an emptiness that threatened to consume him. The landscape began to shift, revealing scenes of people cheering for the rider as he led them through cities, fields, and battlefields. They worshipped him, their eyes glazed with blind devotion. Yet, as Elliot observed more closely, he saw the truth. Their triumphs were hollow, their victories fleeting. The rider offered them nothing of substance, only illusions that disintegrated like sand slipping through fingers. "Why do you deceive them?" Elliot asked, stepping closer despite the growing dread in his chest. The rider turned, his smile twisting into something cold and sinister. "Deception," he echoed. "I offer hope, the illusion they crave. Without me, they would have nothing. Isn't hope, even false hope, better than despair?" Elliot's mind reeled. This was the truth of the first seal. Not just a figure of conquest, but a force that preyed on humanity's desperate need for meaning, offering lies dressed as salvation. Suddenly, the ground beneath Elliot began to tremble, and the scene dissolved into chaos. The rider's followers turned on each other, their faces contorted with anger and betrayal. The once pristine crown on the rider's head cracked, and the light it emitted became a searing glare that burned away the illusions. Elliot shielded his eyes, his heart pounding. "What am I supposed to learn from this?" he shouted into the void. A voice, distinct yet familiar, resonated around him. "The first seal reveals the danger of false promises and the illusions we chase. It is the test of discernment, to see beyond the surface and confront the lies we tell ourselves." Elliot felt a surge of clarity as the words sank in. The illusions of the rider began to dissipate, leaving the barren plain empty once more. He stood alone, the silence returning. But this time it was not oppressive. It was contemplative, filled with the weight of understanding. The robed figure reappeared, standing at the edge of the plain. "You have opened the first seal," it said, its voice steady. "But this is only the beginning. Each seal will demand more of you, and the truths they reveal will not be easy to bear." Elliot nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't fully understand what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't turn back. The faint glow of a second seal appeared in the distance, pulsing like a beacon. "Then lead me to the next," he said, stepping forward. The figure gestured, and the light enveloped him once more. As it consumed him, Elliot felt a deeper truth calling, a whisper from the very fabric of existence, urging him onward. The light dissipated, and Elliot found himself standing at the edge of a battlefield. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid. The sound of clashing swords and the cries of war echoed all around him. In the distance, a rider on a red horse appeared, his fiery steed galloping across the scorched earth. The rider was tall, his face stern and unyielding, wielding a great sword. His presence exuded an unmistakable aura of violence and unrest. Elliot's stomach twisted as he recognized this figure as the second seal. Unlike the first rider, whose promises had been sweet and enticing, this one brought nothing but destruction and turmoil. "The world is fractured," the rider spoke with a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 wars. "Every man is his own enemy, and I am the sword that splits them. Through conflict, I carve the path to power." The rider swung his sword through the air, and the earth beneath them trembled. With each swing, the ground fractured and shattered. People in the distance turned against each other, driven by an overwhelming urge to fight, to dominate, to conquer. "Is this all you bring?" Elliot asked, stepping forward, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The rider's eyes narrowed. Conflict is not merely destruction. It is the force that shapes the world. Through war, empires are built and broken. Through war, the weak are weeded out, and the strong rise to the top. You cannot know peace without first knowing strife. Eliot's mind spun. Was this really the truth? Was conflict the true nature of existence? He watched in horror as families turned on one another, as friends became enemies, and as entire cities were swallowed by the flames of war. As Eliot tried to process the madness around him, he caught a glimpse of something he hadn't expected. In the heart of the battlefield, amidst the destruction, there were moments of quiet, moments where two combatants, exhausted and bloodied, lowered their weapons and shared a glance of understanding. For a brief moment, they saw each other not as enemies, but as fellow beings caught in the same endless cycle of violence. "Do you see?" the robed figure's voice echoed, appearing beside Eliot. "Conflict does not exist without connection. It is through division that we understand unity. It is the tension between opposites that shapes all things." Eliot's mind reeled. Was it possible that the destruction brought by the second seal was not just pointless suffering, but part of some greater cosmic plan? Was this the universe's way of forging something stronger from the broken pieces? The Red Rider turned his gaze back to Eliot. "You do not understand yet, but in time you will. It is only through experiencing the depths of conflict that true growth becomes possible. The soul is tempered through struggle, just as steel is forged in fire." Eliot turned away, struggling to reconcile the message of the rider with the pain and suffering he witnessed. As he walked away from the battlefield, he noticed how the sky was darkening, the once clear horizon now obscured by a haze of smoke and ash. It felt as though the weight of the world's violence was pressing down on him, suffocating him. Must this cycle of violence never end? Eliot whispered to himself. The robed figure stood beside him. The second seal reveals the duality of existence. Conflict, while destructive, is also a catalyst for transformation. It is not until the tension between opposites is resolved that true peace can be achieved. You must understand that the chaos you see now will one day give rise to harmony. Eliot closed his eyes, the truth of the rider's words settling within him. There was no easy answer, no simple resolution to the suffering in the world. The path forward would be one of both struggle and growth, a balance of light and dark, peace and conflict. The figure's voice echoed again. The second seal is only the beginning. The soul must pass through each stage, learning, growing, and transcending. You are not yet ready for the next. With a sudden shift, the landscape around Eliot began to change once more. The battlefield faded, and the air grew still. A sense of calm washed over him, and in the distance, the faint glow of the third seal beckoned. Eliot inhaled deeply, steeling himself for what lay ahead. "Show me the next," he said, determined to move forward, to understand, to awaken. The figure nodded, and with that, the light wrapped around him, pulling him toward the next stage of his journey. Eliot's vision blurred, and when the world settled again, he found himself standing on a barren landscape. The land was dry and cracked, stretching out in every direction like a vast desert. The sky was a dull gray, and there was a suffocating silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. No birds, no animals, no signs of life, only the arid soil beneath his feet. In the distance, he saw a figure approaching on a black horse, its hooves kicking up the dust as it moved with unsettling purpose. The rider was shrouded in dark robes, his face hidden beneath the hood. As the rider drew nearer, Eliot felt a deep unease settle in his chest, the kind of fear that creeps in when something vital has been lost, never to return. "Famine," the robed figure whispered, his voice hollow, as if carried on the wind. "I am the hunger that consumes all, not just the body, but the soul." The rider's eyes glowed a faint green, like the color of decay. In his hand, he held a set of scales, delicately balanced. On one side, a small amount of grain, and on the other, a tiny coin, almost weightless. The imbalance was apparent. One side barely holding anything at all, while the other carried the weight of scarcity. Elliot could feel the weight of the scales in the air, the palpable sense of want, of need, of endless deprivation. The wind shifted, and with it came the sharp scent of rot. He looked around him again. There were no crops, no greenery, just empty fields that stretched on for eternity. "This is your world now," the writer said, his voice cold. "Your systems, your desires, your endless consumption, all lead to this. Famine is not just hunger for food. It is the gnawing emptiness that you try to fill with fleeting things. It is the realization that no matter how much you take, you will never be satisfied." The rider lifted the scales, and a harsh gust of wind blew across the land. The small amount of grain tipped to the ground, scattered by the wind, while the coin remained balanced. Elliot stepped closer, his voice trembling with a mix of confusion and frustration. "Is this the fate we're doomed to? Is this the end of our existence?" The rider turned his gaze to Elliot, eyes gleaming with the quiet despair of someone who had seen the world's hunger from the inside out. "It is not the end, but it is the consequence. Famine is born from greed, from imbalance. The desire for more wealth, more power, more pleasure, creates a void that cannot be filled. The world starves, not because there isn't enough, but because you fail to recognize what truly nourishes the soul." Elliot looked around again, seeing the suffering that ran deeper than mere physical hunger. It was as if the land itself had become a reflection of the inner emptiness of humanity, a world deprived of purpose, a civilization so consumed by its desires that it had destroyed the very foundation of life itself. But then, amidst the devastation, Elliot saw something. An old tree, small and fragile, its roots barely clinging to the cracked earth. And from it, a single flower bloomed, radiant against the desolate backdrop. It was a sign of life, of renewal, hidden in the deepest corner of famine's grasp. "Even in famine, there is hope," Elliot murmured, his voice catching. "Even in emptiness, something can grow." The rider's lips curled into something that resembled a smile, but it was a sad, knowing expression. "You are right. Even in the most barren places, the potential for renewal exists. But you must be willing to look beyond the surface, to see that the famine within is as real as the hunger in the world. The scales are tipping, and what you choose to nourish will determine the future." With a sudden motion, the rider spurred his horse forward, and as he did, the desolation began to fade. The air shifted again, and the land around Elliot seemed to brighten, though the shadows of famine lingered in the corners of his mind. As the rider disappeared into the horizon, Elliot's thoughts lingered on the flower that had bloomed in the desert. Could hope really spring from the most hopeless of places? The ground beneath Elliot's feet seemed to shift once more, and as the world around him began to fade, he took a final glance at the arid landscape. There was no turning back for what he had just witnessed, but perhaps that was the point. Sometimes it is only through the harshest of trials that one can begin to understand what truly sustains the spirit. "Show me the next," Elliot whispered, ready to move forward into whatever came next, whatever revelations the seals had to offer. The robed figure appeared beside him again. "You must keep going, for what lies ahead will shape your understanding of the world, and of yourself. The next seal awaits." With that, Elliot took a step into the unknown, his journey of awakening continuing. The moment Elliot stepped forward, everything around him seemed to disappear. There was no landscape, no horizon, just a vast, infinite emptiness. The air was thick with stillness, a silence so profound that it seemed to envelop him from all sides. It was as if the very fabric of existence had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. Even the beating of his heart seemed muffled, swallowed by the quiet that stretched endlessly. In the distance, a faint light appeared, slowly growing stronger, until it filled the space with a soft, warm glow. And within that light, a figure emerged, an angel, resplendent and towering, with wings that shimmered like starlight. The angel's face was serene, its eyes filled with a quiet understanding that transcended any earthly emotion. "Elliot," the angel spoke, its voice a harmonious blend of peace and power. "You have reached the final seal. The seventh seal. The seal of silence." Elliot, still reeling from the vision of the famine and the lessons of the previous seals, could feel the weight of this moment. The silence was overwhelming, and yet it was not oppressive. There was something sacred about it, as though the world had finally ceased its endless noise to reveal a deeper truth. "What is this place?" Elliot asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking aloud would break the fragile balance of the silence surrounding him. "This is the space between," the angel replied. "The space between the known and the unknown, between the seen and the unseen. The seventh seal is not a force of destruction or trial, but of transcendence. It is the moment when all things cease to speak, when the noise of the world falls away, and the soul encounters the divine in its purest form." Elliot's mind raced. He had been expecting the seventh seal to be a moment of finality, perhaps a cataclysmic event that would bring all things to an end. But this silence, this stillness, felt like something altogether different. It felt as though everything he had known, everything he had learned, was leading him to this one moment of complete emptiness. "The silence," Elliot murmured, more to himself than to the angel. "It's like the end of all things, but also the beginning." The angel nodded. "Exactly. The seventh seal is the seal of divine completion, the moment of the ultimate union with the source of all things. It is when the soul transcends the duality of existence, good and evil, life and death, joy and sorrow, and enters the eternal silence of the divine. It is the peace that comes after the storm, the resolution that follows the conflict. But it is not an end in the way you understand. It is the beginning of a new state of being." As the angel spoke, the silence around them seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm, like the beating of a heart that transcended time and space. Elliot felt his own heart slowing, each beat syncing with the cosmic silence that enveloped him. There was no longer a sense of separation between him and the infinite. He was not just an observer in this moment. He was part of it, a part of the silence that was both everything and nothing. "The gnosis you have sought through all the seals," the angel continued, "was not meant to show you the end of the world, but to reveal the truth of the world beyond it. The truth of your soul, of the divine spark within you, that can never be extinguished. The silence is the place where all things return to their source, where the dualities of existence dissolve, and where true peace is found." Elliot stood still, his mind reeling from the enormity of what the angel had just said. The seals, the visions, the trials, they had not been about the world's destruction. They had been about him, about his journey, his awakening, his understanding of the deeper layers of existence. The seventh seal had revealed to him that the ultimate purpose of life was not to avoid suffering, not to escape death, but to transcend them, to find peace in the silence, in the unity of all things. The angel smiled gently, as though it knew Elliot's thoughts before he did. "You have glimpsed the truth, Elliot. The journey you have undertaken is not one of destruction or despair, but of transformation. The seals have opened a way for you to understand the cycles of existence, to see beyond the illusions of the material world. And now, you must take this understanding with you, for the world is waiting for those who can transcend the noise and enter into the silence of the divine." Elliot's heart swelled with a quiet, overwhelming gratitude. He understood now. The world, with all its chaos, its suffering, its desires, was a reflection of the soul's journey. It was through facing the darkness, the famine, the death, and the silence that one could truly awaken. And in that awakening, there was peace, peace that no worldly circumstance could ever touch. As the angel began to fade, its form dissolving into the radiant light of the seventh seal, Elliot took a deep breath. The silence filled him, and for the first time in his life, he felt complete, whole, at peace. He was no longer bound by the world's noise or its distractions. He had seen the truth, the divine truth that had always been there, hidden behind the veil of illusion. And now, he was free.